Well, welcome, Django.
Hi, glad
welcome
to
to
be here.
Jacksonville.
Hi, everyone.
We have really mediocre football, so
It's okay. I spent a lot of time in Pittsburgh where they have utterly mediocre baseball. Football is pretty good.
They have pretty great football.
They do.
For a long
It's all anyone cares about. If you go to a baseball game, there's a counter, which is what it actually is the number of regular season games left. But they joke it's the number of days till football season starts on the dashboard at the baseball stadium.
That's awesome. Well, I'm excited to hang out and chat with you all and get to know you, Django. We were just sitting here chatting. We're about to return to the topic we were just talking about. But so really just want to kind of get you talking about craft and stuff like that. Obviously, we'll talk some about how to become the Dark Lord and die trying in its upcoming sequel.
Yes.
And finale, right?
Yeah. It's a 2-book series. So close now. I've been waiting for so long.
Crazy.
These
Comes
things
out.
take so long.
It does take forever. It's like you finish. I was listening to an interview with you this past week, and it's so true. It's like you put something out and then you wait. And it's like a year-long process. And you've since long moved on. You're like, I get to go talk about that.
Yeah, by the time you actually, like, the book comes out and people want to do interviews and stuff and talk to you, and you're like, this is like ancient history now.
Yeah,
like, I know it kind of, like, obviously I'm not that big a deal, but it makes me feel for like the actors who have to do like press junkets when their movie comes out, because those take even longer. So everything they're talking about is like ancient history for them, right? I was on set 2 years ago and they've been doing the CGI ever since.
Yeah. You have to drug up your memory. You're like, what was I doing?
Yeah.
When I was coming up with that book. But to dive into it, we were just chatting about this. So talking about I'd love to start with like origin stories, like of you as a writer, as a creator, and going, from what I understand, like TTRPGs, D&D was sort of the beginning of the catalyst for like, maybe I want to be a writer. And just tell us about that.
Basically that. So I got into TTRPGs at a really young age, like 10 probably. And then when I was in high school, I got really into it because I found a group of people. Before that, it had just been like me and 2 of my friends. But I found an older friend of mine had an RPG group, and they kind of scouted me. He would literally just like go around the lunchroom to all the freshmen and like find anyone who was like reading a fantasy novel and be like, hey, do you want to join a D&D group? Like, no joke. That's how it worked. We basically kidnapped my friend Dave when he got into high school. Awesome. So I played that. I played a lot of the Rifts RPG, which was our game of choice, which is a really bad rule set, although it has some fun lore, but man, is it a bad rule set. We played that so much. It's kind of incomprehensible to me now. We'd play Friday and Saturday nights for like 7 or 8 hours, and then sometimes Sunday as well. And like, we didn't get a lot of dates at that time. D&D was not, TTRPGs were not cool like they are now. Like it's really been kind of amazing to see how that has come into the mainstream from what was a very sort of niche back in 1995 or whenever I was a kid.
Right. Do you think that I wonder if it's like because so much electronic stuff has come up, people are just like begging to get around other people and just sit around a table and have connection again or something?
I mean, I think
there does seem to be
there's a little bit of that. We were talking earlier, I think one of the problems with D&D's popularity has just always been it's a very hard thing to just explain. Like, until you see it played, or better yet, play yourself, it's hard to even understand what it is, what this game is. And so for all of its history from the 70s to, the 2000s, it has only been able to spread by kind of like word of mouth, like, hey, join our group, sit on the session, whatever. And then like what we now call actual plays started, this sort of streams, Critical Role, Acquisitions Incorporated, all that stuff. And all of a sudden you could see it in a way that you had never been able to before. And people were like, well, what's D&D? And you say this, watch this. And way more people were interested in it than would have ever sort of considered joining a group at their local club. And that's like probably most of the big popularity that, people are like, oh, I heard about that being weird, but it's actually super fun. And but also just like nerd stuff has become way more mainstream.
Normal.
You know, ever since comic book movies took over the world, you can't really call that niche anymore.
Yeah. That's what I was telling you right before the chat. I was like, I only started playing role-playing games, tabletop role-playing games like 3 years ago. And it was because my daughter was like, I want to try it. So we went to a local game shop and we like did a one-shot night there. And I was like, this is the greatest thing I've ever done in my entire. And now my kids, like much to their chagrin, they're like, Dad, hush with the role-playing games, because I'm constantly trying to rope them into something. But just very quickly, I was like, wow, this is amazing, and became the constant GM. And so in the story you just told me, what scares me is, were you the GM for 6 hours? And how much did you have prepped?
Well, those are two questions. And so, first of all, no, I wasn't always the GM. With that much playtime, our Rifts group was ravenous for GMs.
Okay.
And so I did get pulled into GMing very quickly, even though I basically didn't know what I was doing. But we had this system. We had, between 8 and sometimes up to like 15 people in this group. And so we usually split into 2 or 3 games.
Okay.
And people would just volunteer to run one night, or, however long their adventure was. And then they'd stop and pick up their own character and somebody else would take over. Yeah. Which led to a very incoherent campaign, as you might imagine. But it meant that just everybody wanted to play. So there were always too many players and not GM. So they were always just like, do you want a GM? Do you want a GM? Do you want a GM? So I got drafted in a lot, although it was not literally all the time. But it made running an adventure sort of tricky, because different people would show up each time, and the policy was just to sort of go with it. Sort of given the kind of game Rifts is, there was this sort of telephone played between the people who had been there last time and the people who had not, as to like what the story was. So the analogy I used at the time, it's like, imagine you're reading like Dragonlance, and then like in book 2, with no explanation, Caramon and Tasselhoff are replaced by like a ninja and a robot with plasma missiles, and like you just like go awesome, like whatever. And like the story goes from like this complicated thing with NPCs in the first session, and then like after 2 or 3 games of telephone, it's just like we're shooting those guys, just those guys in red, those are the bad guys.
That's awesome. I mean, go ahead, sorry.
The other story is that if in terms of how much stuff you have prepped, the secret, and this works very well in Rifts because the combat system is a nightmare, you just have ninjas attack. And so they'd be like, Django, GM something. I'm like, I don't have anything pretty. And they're like, come on. So I'd sit down and it's like, all right, you guys are all drinking your favorite tavern. Suddenly the door explodes and ninjas come in and attack. And then like the combat takes 3 hours and you can think of other stuff while it's happening.
Hey, well, that is fairly true. Like I've certainly got to the point where I've learned that a lot of GM is just like, they have characters, give them a problem, and just let it go and just see where it goes. But you were talking about how, so part of the journey in me that I've enjoyed with them is like, I grew up mainly an artist. And then as I got older, I was like, oh, I actually kind of love this writing thing. And so writing has always been sort of a struggle for me. But now that I've gotten into role-playing games, it's sort of unlocked storytelling or writing as a very fun activity because of sort of the randomness and all this sort of thing. But you were saying that your group was largely focused on the combat, and they made you like, I want to go tell the story. So like, how did you transition from the TTRPG thing to writing your own stories?
It was almost literally that I wanted to tell stories. I was reading, big chunky fantasy novels and so on, and I wanted to tell stories like that. But every time I tried, all they wanted to do was shoot things or fight things. And so I kind of ultimately turned to writing because I wanted to tell stories to someone who would pay attention and not these players who were just like, yeah. Get to the next fight.
Let the next ninja band attack.
And so that's kind of how I started in that.
Yeah. How do you, what do you think it taught you as a young writer? Like, I'm sure there's a few of you who play and maybe have some aspirations of writing. It really was for me like, wow, this is an amazing tool to teach you how to tell stories. Did you feel that way too? Like it sort of primed you in a way that was really unique or helpful?
I sort of discovered it afterwards.
Okay.
I didn't go into it thinking about that because I hadn't had any real thought about writing. I started writing, sort of co-op writing in like senior year of high school, maybe. But it definitely did. It gets you into that mindset of just like, what's the next thing that happens? Like, it's a very, tabletop RPG writing is very pulp. You're stuck in a given perspective, and because it's the players, you can't cut away to some other scene, and it's always just, okay, what happens next, right? You can't sort of dwell on things or introspect too much, and so it's possible to kind of take it too far in that direction. But it's a really good sort of prep for writing kind of fast-paced, actiony stuff. And especially if you get good at TTRPGs. There are a lot of GMs who are not very good. But if you get good at getting the players to drive the story, that's a super helpful thing in real writing, because in RPGs and writing both, a common failing is to have the story be something that happens to the characters rather than something that the characters create. We say that the characters don't have agency, and this is true in D&D as well, right? If the story is just, you ride a roller coaster from place to place and occasionally get out to fight monsters, like, it's boring.
Yeah. That, I think that's what it's taught me more than anything, because I tend to start, when I write, almost like I start from the plot and then I kind of work my way around all that. It's just usually that's what comes first, is like some interesting plot hook. But what I've learned with playing role-playing games has been like, oh yeah, you just sort of drop some characters into a scenario and they will make a story. If you're letting them be honest to it, it seems like.
You can take it too far. Like, your writing does need some things that you don't get in TTRPGs.
Sure.
There's a lot of like, you can rely more on coincidence in tabletop RPGs than you can in real writing. People start to roll their eyes at you. But yeah, it's a big help.
Yeah. I found it to be super helpful.
We used to do these DMing exercises where we'd just like roll random pages from some of the books, and you'd have to, like, 3 times, and you'd have to build an adventure with an element from each page. And it was surprisingly fun and like really helpful in retrospect. We didn't know what we were doing at the time.
I think that's the thing I'm learning the most too, is like, oh yeah, you can put a lot of really interesting elements together and come up with something really cool on the other side of it, Yeah. So well, kind of going on from there. So what was the journey then from going like, hey, I've been playing these, I'm starting to write. Kind of how did you get into your like first professional gigs? How did you transition from like, hey, I'm doing this, I'm learning it, I'm getting published?
There's about 20 years in there is what happened.
I get it. Yeah.
So, I wrote some short fiction. I wrote a novel, terrible novel. This is just a Matrix ripoff because this was 1999. And of course it is. But I did a lot of just stuff I posted online for free in like forums. I did some fan fiction work back on fanfiction.net when that was, a thing. Maybe it's still a thing. I haven't paid attention in decades. In retrospect, again, it's all good practice. I didn't really think of doing it for a living. My training is in computer science, because I always thought, even after I started writing my own stuff and like trying to get it published, I always thought computer science would be my day job, that I would be a programmer and this was my hobby. But so I did a bunch of fan fiction. I wrote 3 or 4 fan fiction novels, and then this is now like senior year in college maybe. And I was like, okay, I'm going to try and write a book to get published, because I had done a little reading about how one does that. And I tried to sell some short stories to magazines. I never sold anything. And then I was like, all right, well, I'll try to write a book for publication, because it seemed like fun. And so I did. And I got, back in the day, to try to publish a book, you got this physical book called Writer's Market, which is just like a big list of all the people who buy books and their guidelines and their addresses. And then you wrote a bunch of like big envelopes and mailed them out, which is a little ridiculous now, but that's what I did. And I ended up selling the novel to a small press called Medallion, which no longer exists, for like $500, and it printed a couple thousand copies and disappeared without a trace. But that was like a big achievement by my standards. I sold one more novel to them, and then there was another 5-year gap because I moved across the country and it took a while to get my writing back on track. This is when I moved from Pittsburgh to Seattle. But I finally did. And then finally I sent the book out to agents and did the whole querying thing. And one of the agents finally took it and brought it to a real publisher. And so that's kind of where I ended up. But that took me from, starting writing in 1999. I think Memories of Empire was published in 2004, maybe. This is just off the top of my head. It's on my website somewhere. And then 1,000 Names is 2012 or 2013. So, 14 or 15 years.
Yeah. It's a journey for sure.
Yeah.
And
I don't know if it's typical or not. I know many people who did it much faster and some who took much longer.
It took me my Facebook memories just popped up that it's been like 13 years, it's maybe took like a decade to finally get the first like actual book deal.
Yeah.
And one of the things I wanted to ask you about that is I think a challenge for a lot of people who are maybe trying to get started on this thing is you are sort of juggling sort of like, hey, I have work, I have family, and I'm trying to write.
Oh yeah.
How did you manage that? That's sort of like, hey, this is a thing I want, but it's not a thing that's like available. I have to do this in the spaces, like encouragement to other people on that as well.
Yeah. I mean, it's, the only thing, people ask for writing advice, and the only thing that's like universally applicable is you have to actually write.
That's right. Yeah.
Not necessarily every day, but like at a regular frequency, you have to produce books regularly. Mm-hmm. I had to write many fan fiction and other pieces before I got to the point where I feel like I wrote something really publishable.
Right.
And fan fiction is great for that because no one is gonna, not that fan fiction is necessarily bad. Like there are many great fan fiction writers, but the beauty of it is that no one's going to tell you no, right? No one's going to say, oh, this is no good, you can't publish it. And so it's great for people who are starting out. But in terms of juggling the time, I've always had like a lot of time consuming hobbies. So that sort of felt really normal to me, is that like I go to work and then I spend time on my hobbies, whether it's, D&D or Warhammer or this. The only big difference for writing was I had to make time in the mornings because by the time I got back from work, I was always just kind of blasted. So for years, my routine was sort of wake up a couple hours before work, do an hour of writing a day, and then go to work and then, do other things. When I wanted to get more serious about it, because for a while, after college, I worked at the university, which was a pretty sort of lackadaisical job. So it was actually pretty good for this sort of thing. And then after that project ended, I had to get a real job. But I knew I wanted to do writing. And so, when I was applying for jobs, I would ask around like, how much overtime do you guys work here? Which if you want to get a job is not a great question to ask. It tells people that you don't want to work overtime, and like, obviously they don't want to hire you. But if you're pretty confident of getting a job, and, I was at the time, then it lets you sort of select for places that are not going to work you to death. And that was kind of important to me because the thing, I don't know how I picked this up, but it definitely turned out to be really true, is like, you never want to be in a situation where you have a certain amount of time to make it, or else, something bad happens, right? You run out of money, you have to move back in with your parents, you go insane, whatever. You need to be in a sort of sustainable situation because there's no telling how long it will take. You need to be in a position where you can just, go to your job and make enough to live on. And, sometimes there are trade-offs, where I ended up working at Microsoft, I didn't go work in the Xbox division, which in 2007 was like the hot, cool place to work. I worked in .NET Core documentation, which was like everybody there was well into their 50s. It was, people who were kind of serving time till retirement. And so probably not the best career move in the sense of like getting ahead on the corporate ladder, but we went home at 5 every day.
Yeah.
And I had plenty of time. And, you know, I made enough money to live. So it's that, you know, you got to get in a situation where you're not going crazy because man, I see people who are like, you know, I moved to the city and I threw everything off and I've got my savings and all I got to do is make it big sometime in the next 2 years. And like when you're 18, 2 years feels like forever, but man, is it not? And this business is so slow.
It is very slow. I talk with young creator. One of the things I had to learn along that way too is like, oh, my day job is actually a really great blessing. Because I'm like you said, like your needs are met, your bills are paid, and I can pursue whatever creative thing I want to rather than taking work that I had to take to pay the bills or whatever. And because writing books takes such a long time, it gives you that runway to be like, hey, I can focus on this and give it the space it needs.
I mean, obviously the dream is a day job where you can write books during your job. Yeah. I think Brandon Sanderson famously was a night clerk at a hotel where, you know, for hours and hours, nothing would happen. And that's great. And, you know, that can be worth, you know, obviously you don't get paid a lot for that kind of work, but it can be worth it if, you know, if it's just you in your apartment, you don't have kids or anything, you know, who cares? Yeah. You know, as long as you make enough to live.
Yeah. I mean, it seemed to work out for him. Yeah. But yeah, so I agree with you. Having that space to give I've seen a lot of writers and creators just like that financial pressure just ruins it because it's like, how am I going to eat next week? And instead of focusing on the craft, they're desperate, you know, so.
I actually, you know, I wonder these days if the thing to do wouldn't be to get some kind of remote work and live somewhere cheap. It seems so dumb to live where I live. I love where I live in Redmond, but it's expensive. And if I moved to like rural Ohio, I could live in a palace for $500 a month, right? Yeah. You know, and I could do all my work via internet.
We're certainly
live next to John Scalzi.
Yeah. Oh, that'd be cool.
Yeah. He seems like a nice guy.
Yeah. He seems pretty cool. But yeah, so that's cool. It sounds like that's sort of a pattern I've seen too, is like, yeah, you have to kind of find a way to just get that work in every single day. And it just takes time.
And to be clear, it doesn't, you know, people debate whether like you have to work every day and like there's no hard and fast rules. I definitely know people who would like not work at all and then spend like 8 hours on Saturday and Sunday working. Like everybody has their own thing. Yeah. It's just a matter of like doing it regularly enough that you finish things. Right. You have to finish projects.
Right. Pivoting a little bit from that, but like one of the things I was impressed with in like looking at your bibliography is like you've written a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm 13 years into this thing. I've got 5 books under me, and I'm just like, wow. And I fall into writer's block and stuff a lot. And so I'm like, how do you push through all that? Like, I guess I'm looking like, how do you maintain that sort of creativity? So you're putting things out with a lot of regularity. Do you get writer's block? How do you push through it? I'm giving you a lot of questions.
Yeah.
Show me the things.
It's weird. You know, I don't always believe in writer's block. I think like writer's block makes it sound like it's this external thing. Like we have moods is all. Like sometimes you're not in a good mood and you don't want to write. But like, you know, that's true for anyone in any profession, right? Do plumbers get plumber's block where they're like, I just don't want to snake this drain today? You know, if you're treating this as a job, then like it's a job. And a big part of it is, you know, when I write these books, and some days you feel terrible and you're like, this is awful. Everything I've wrote today, I'm going to have to get rid of. Like, it's just bad. And then some days you feel really great and you're jazzed and the thing came out. And then like, if I put the book down and then I reread it later, because we're editing or whatever, I can't tell which is which, right? I've learned that my sort of subjective assessment at the time is incredibly unreliable.
Okay.
And so the thing to do is just keep pushing through it. And then you can fix it later. The best thing about writing is that you're not doing it live. You know, no one will ever know if you write something bad and you go back and delete it. They won't tell you. Yeah. I mean, after I quit my day job, which was in 2013, something like that. I got a bit more productive, although frustratingly not as much as I had hoped. I had been like, I'm writing 1 hour a day. I'm going to quit my job. Now I can write 8 hours a day. I'll be 8 times as productive. Not even close. I may be twice as productive. Just because I don't, creativity is hard, basically.
Yeah.
It's harder than, computer programming. Yeah. But it's still pretty productive. I am the person who writes every day, every weekday at least. And so I go through and, crank out my X number of words every day, and eventually it builds up.
And so you aiming for a word count every day?
Yeah. These days it's 2,000 words a day or so. Okay. I was doing 3,000, but then I had a child, and that
it changes things.
Has made things harder.
Yeah. I think the crux of the question I was looking at was, how do you get unstuck? Because we all get those, we're like, I don't know what to do next. But that's I've been thinking about this a lot this week. It's like, I should probably just keep writing, and just either I'll figure out something down the line that can fix the things at the front, or whatever the case might be,
It's frustrating because there's always a solution, but the solution is always very individual. It depends on the person. So it's not really something you can tell people, other than you can ask writers and consider what they tell you sort of a toolbox to grab out of, but it's not like a dictate, because what works for everyone is different.
Yeah.
For me, the other thing that works is outlining. I used to hate outlining. When I wrote The 1,000 Names, which is my first sort of big published book, I didn't use an outline, and it was miserable, and it took 2 years or whatever, 3 years. And then we sold it, and I was going to do this 5-book series, and my agent somehow sold the publisher on that. And then the publisher said, hey, we need an outline, a series outline for what happens in the rest of the books. And I was like, oh, I don't really do outlines. And they're like, well, you have to. And I said, oh, okay. So I took a month and I wrote this outline, and it was miserable. I hated doing it. It was just so painful. And then when the time came to write the second book, and I had this outline to look at, and I was like, oh my God, this is so much easier.
Oh, yeah.
It's so much better now. And ever since then, I've been kind of a convert. I now write these very long outlines. They're maybe 10% of the final word count in outline. So, a 10,000 word outline for a 100,000 word book. And, it helps. And, I think it helps with that getting stuck, because you can work through a lot of that stuff in the outline phase.
Yeah.
And, so, you don't get stuck as much because you just look at the outline and you know what comes next.
Yeah.
You've kind of gone through all that agonizing and fast forward, because the good part of it is that when you write a bunch of chapters in outline and you're like, actually, this is terrible, it's way easier to go back and do something else.
You can let it go. You're not quite so precious about it.
Yeah.
And one of the helpful things a friend of mine told me is like, well, remember, you're still discovery writing when you're outlining. Like, you don't have it all figured out in your head.
No, that's the whole point.
Yeah. You're just doing it a little faster or differently. I did want to make sure we got some time to talk about your book.
Yeah.
We're just blazing through time here. So How to Become the Dark Lord and Die Trying. Is this your most recent thing?
Technically, no.
Okay.
This last year, first I had this, then I had the Spelljammer book, Memories Wake, and then I had Last Stop, which is an audio first thing from Podium.
Okay.
It's a sort of half a regular book length. It's a weird project. But this is definitely the sort of biggest thing I did last year in terms of reception and buzz and what the publishers think.
Well, do you mind sharing with folks like your version of a quick synopsis of what the book's about?
Dark Lord? So Davi is basically, she has been taken from Earth to a fantasy world and is told by, a gray-bearded old wizard that she has to save the kingdom from the Dark Lord. She discovers that she's in a time loop. So every time she dies, it resets back to the beginning with the wizard telling her she has to save the kingdom from the Dark Lord. And after about 1,000 years of this subjectively, where she tries and tries and tries and can't save the kingdom, and she always dies, she snaps and takes the wizard and grinds his face into paste and declares that she is going to become the Dark Lord. And the story kind of goes on from there.
Right.
It's a very strange book. It's funny, hopefully. I've never tried to write comedy before this. And so that was a challenge, mostly in a sort of like, oh my God, is this... Whenever you write... When you do comedy like live, you get to see if people laugh. When you write comedy, you're just like, are people going to think this is funny, or is everyone just going to think I'm a weirdo? Like, is that what's going to happen? So that, and it's a little dirty. It's definitely not a kid's book. There's a lot of dirty jokes mostly. It was just weird. It was a weird book. And I'm so grateful that my editor, who acquired me to write more conventional epic fantasy, was like, yeah, that sounds awesome. Do it. And so we did it.
Well, I think that's what stood out to me about it. When I looked at it, I was like, this is a really different sort of concept. Like, it felt immediately just from the description of like, that's going to be fun. It sort of feels like I've heard you talk about it like sort of an anime trope. What's that?
I pitched this, at least to my friends who understand what I'm talking about, as ReZero X. So I'm a spider. So what? If that means anything to anyone. Those are two anime series, and this book is kind of like a cross between them. One of them is a time loop series. The other one is about a girl who dies and is transported to a fantasy world, but she's reincarnated as like a monstrous spider. And so there's a little bit of both of those in there. But yeah, it's definitely, I watch a lot of anime, and there's definitely a lot of that sort of isekai stuff in there.
Yeah. It's sort of, I was like, this is like a Portal fantasy meets Groundhog Day. Yeah. With like, it's in a lot of humor, and the footnotes in it kill me. So in the book, there will be, you're just reading, and there'll be a footnote, and then down at the bottom, there will be kind of Davi's thoughts on the things she just said, and it all cracks me up quite a bit.
I always associate footnotes with humor. I think that comes from Terry Pratchett, who uses footnotes a lot, and they're always very funny. And so in this, I just had to do it, and it always makes me laugh.
What was, so kind of on that same thing, I'm sure, we get asked these sort of questions, but like, what was the combination of things that you're like, this might work? Like, how did this idea ruminate and then turn into a thing where...
It came from a bunch of different things. I had a long-standing idea about a girl who's supposed to save the world, but kind of learns it's impossible or refuses to take it seriously. In ReZero, in particular, there's a part, I forget the main character's name, but he's also stuck in a time loop, and he has to sort of try to negotiate these impossible situations so that all his friends end up alive at the end of them. And no one else remembers anything from between time loops. And so he's constantly sort of trying to convince people to do the right thing, or to do whatever weird thing that he knows will do it. And there's a point in the first series where he just sort of snaps, and he just starts shouting at people like, why won't you idiots listen to me? And I was like, that is a good place to start a character. That is where I want to start. And so that was kind of the start of it. Okay. And then I wrote a sample to send to my agent, and the voice just kind of took off from there. The other big influence, there's a book called The Price You Pay by Aidan Trewin, which I highly recommend to everyone. Go look it up. It's fantastic. Also very much not for kids. But it's... Aidan Trewin is a pseudonym for Nick Harkaway, who is a wonderful writer. But this book is just, it's a sort of genteel but psychotic coke dealer who goes on a rampage of revenge. And it's in sort of tight first person, like very strong voice. And it's amazing. And I had read that, and I was like, oh my God, I have to do something like this if I can. It's so good. It's one of my favorite books ever.
That's awesome. What are your feelings about the sequel coming out in the end?
I'm really happy with it. It feels like a million years since I've worked on it, as we were saying. So I'm really glad to sort of finally get to the point where I can show people. this thing. I'm really happy that we did this in 2 books. I think it was the right move. We had originally kind of pitched a trilogy just because trilogies are sort of the fantasy default. But when we worked out the story, I'm like, I think it just works better as 2, because then you can avoid this sort of middle book syndrome where nothing really important can happen because there's a 3rd book.
Yeah.
And it's got a lot of nice symmetry. And so I'm really happy with that. It does feel a little, I'm like, I'm doing a new thing, but they were like, ooh, this has been doing really well. Can you do something like this? And it's sort of hard to do anything quite like it.
Yeah.
Because it's so specific. If you tried to do something that's like, oh, this is like similar, like it would feel weird.
Yeah, it feels like, or maybe forced, or it's like, hey.
And I'm like, this is another story with a character who's from our world and has pop culture references and witty humor and, has it like, it'd be weird. So I'm doing something different.
Oh, well, and the name for it is awesome. So everybody wants to rule the world except me.
Everybody wants to rule the world except me, with apologies to Tears for Fears. But yes.
Yeah.
Titles are hard, but I think we got that one right.
They're both perfect because like you read that title and you're like, okay, I get the vibes, that we're going to have some humor and then, fantasy and everything mixed into it. So I thought it was great. And so more generally though, I guess I was going to ask, like, is that when you're putting together ideas like something like this, is it sort of this slow, like, gathering of influences and things that excite you, or do they like, what is your process of developing an idea from like a nugget to a thing?
It depends on the story. Usually like I get ideas and I write them down in a file on my computer that's like ideas.txt, and it's very long now because it's been many, many years. And so when the time comes to do a new project, I'll usually have like one idea that I think of as the core of it. And then I go look through for other stuff that might fit. Okay. And often you'll find something from 5 or 10 years ago that, is a good world design element or is a good character who fits into this story that got cut from an earlier story. So it's a little bit of like, you have the kind of basic idea, but then there's a lot of sort of rummaging through the bits box to see what's left over.
So kind of looking at your other ideas and mashing them together and going, oh yeah, that thing and this one would fit.
Because the stuff I write down is usually not a complete book, right? It'll be like, ooh, it would be cool to do a character like XYZ, or like this would be a cool world design. Like, what about a world with ABC in it? And like, or here's a magic system, and this is how these people fight duels or whatever. And then so like you kind of plug those things together, and you sort of see what fits.
It's a cool idea to do it, especially if it's all like ideas in one place.
Yeah,
I tend to like separate them. Like, ooh, that's that idea for that thing. But I guess, if you have this gigantic text, you just go back and you have this great memory of like all these things that you've come up with.
Yeah, that's the chief way.
That's a cool
and then
idea.
Of course it develops as you bang on it.
Yeah, obviously. Yeah, that's really cool. Before we get into other questions from the audience, I did want to ask you, going back to like your computer science stuff with AI. I know you were working on developing that. Obviously, huge hot button topic for folks.
Oh God, yes.
But so I'm not the biggest. I'm not a huge detractor of it. I think there's a lot of good that it can help us with. But the boundaries are obviously like, where are these? Do you think they're going to have a place in helping creatives? Like, where do you think they are a useful tool for creatives, or do you think we should kind of avoid them at all costs?
I think we should avoid them at all costs. Creatives should certainly. I mean, so. AI, when we say AI now, meaning sort of generative AI, this sort of large language models and their various descendants, is really sort of only a subset of the field of AI. And there are many things going on in the field of AI that are great. There's, protein folding and developing medicine and whatever. So, but when I say AI now, I mean, Chat GPT.
Sure. Okay.
And what those things are, they're a sort of like averager of all of the written word.
Yeah.
And so if you ask them for creative ideas, what you will get back is like the most banal, bland stuff possible. Because that is what it is literally doing is finding the most likely word to follow the previous word based on your prompt and its weights and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And so, maybe it's useful for writing marketing copy where writing bland, banal copy is like the goal.
Yeah.
But like for any kind of creative work, like forget it. Like you're also at risk of like accidental plagiarism because it has a tendency, especially in more obscure areas, to sort of spit back its training data.
Yeah.
So I hate it. I do. And
yeah.
I mean, I kind of consider it unethical because like there's a big story about this recently, but like the Meta AI, for example, is just trained on everybody's books. Like my books are in there. All that stuff is in there. Nobody ever asked permission. Nobody got paid. If copyright is to mean anything, and I feel like as authors and libraries, we have to believe that it does, then we can't just operate that way. We can't say, oh, well, we already took everything, so too bad, guys. So I'm, AI as a field has many cool and interesting things in it. I personally hope that OpenAI specifically is sued out of existence and someone builds a more ethical, more useful foundation on the ashes.
Yeah. The trouble of it is like, there's a lot of really great stuff that I think it's going to do in other areas, but what it is, it's definitely globbing up a lot of the creative space with things.
I would say my appeal to young people is do not use AI for search. It lies to you. Like there are a lot of really easy tests, but like I can go and ask the AI like Chat GPT to summarize one of my books, and it just makes stuff up. Like it's just like factually wrong almost 100% of the time.
Oh wow.
And that's a fairly obscure topic. It does get some things right about major topics, but like a recent study I think showed that when it was doing news items, it was wrong 60% of the time.
Oh wow. Yeah.
And so these things are just not reliable.
Yeah. It's not all there yet, but it's a huge topic. And so sorry to take you on that trip, but I know it's
I always hate to interrupt the flow.
The problem is shutting me up. I could yell about AI.
Fair enough.
I could be the old man yelling at clouds for like an hour.
In case y'all didn't know, it's a big topic in the creative community.
Well, we're not shutting you up. We're just shifting. So if anyone wants to ask questions about AI in the creative space, you're more than welcome to. But we are going to open it up to audience questions. So if anybody has a questions, we do have the note cards on the clipboards for you to write them down. And if you have any written, just hold them up. A volunteer will be going to you to grab them and we will pass them along. I already see some hands up, so I will go ahead and grab some to hand over. Lovely. We'll start us off with these two, and I will hand things back over to Michael and Django.
Sweet.
What do we got?
All right. Let's see. Our first one is from Haley Davenport. What's your favorite TTRPG system to play?
Ooh, tough. Right now, probably still Pathfinder First Edition. I haven't really done any Second Edition. It's been a while since I did a lot of serious TTRPGing though, because scheduling things when you're grown up with kids is a goddamn nightmare. But me and my friends have been able to get time for Gloomhaven and Frosthaven. So I've played through both of those and they're fantastic.
Awesome. Thank you. There's a few questions on here, but I want to make sure some other folks get a chance to get there. So so this is a good one. Maybe even thinking specifically about the Dark Lord Davy books. How different was the final draft from the first? Did any of those original elements make it into the sequel?
So the way my process works, the final draft is always very similar to the first draft because I outline so heavily. What it boils down to is I hate editing. Like some people think that's the fun part, and for me, it's just the worst. I like the drafting more. And so my whole process is structured to edit as little as possible. So I do these sort of many passes of outlines and sort of complicated outlines. And so the answer is the first draft is very close to the final draft. We didn't change very much in Davi. In particular, some of probably most of the words that I wrote for the initial pitch are actually still the introduction. Davi's so voicey, it kind of like gelled really early. There are some books that took a little longer. The one I'm working on now, I had to rewrite 30 or 40,000 words. But for me, usually a lot of that sort of pulling things out and moving them around happens in the outline phase before I actually write any prose.
Do you struggle with like not wanting to jump from outlining and just start drafting? You're just like, I'm tired of being in this outline phase.
Yeah, sometimes I'm just like, oh God, but like, I know it'll be easier.
You stay disciplined with it through the whole.
Usually I stay disciplined with it. Sometimes I jump the gun.
I really struggle with it.
It can be useful sometimes, like with Davi actually, to just sort of jump in and write like 10,000 words just to get the voice and the character down.
That's cool.
And then that can help like go back to the outline now that you're like, okay, now I know who this person is a little better.
Yeah.
You know, or even a scene that's not even in the final book. You just like write a scene of them talking and then you know.
That's a good idea.
I find once I like start setting someone's dialogue down, I know who they are a lot better.
That's cool. That's a good idea. I've also seen like the scriptman idea where you're sort of writing an outline, but you're adding dialogue and it's like this gigantic.
Yeah. I mean, there's a million different ways to do it.
So here's another RPG related question. How do I get started writing a D&D campaign?
Ooh. I am not a great source for this because it's been a long time, but the best way to get started writing a D&D campaign is to figure out who you're going to be playing with it, because the best D&D campaigns are tailored to the players. And so you want to figure out what kind of elements your players are going to want, whether they're more into the sort of crunchy combat stuff or more into the story, whether they're comfortable with, different types of plots, all that stuff. That helps a lot. And then, D&D campaigns can be unique because unlike a book, you don't have to write them all out beforehand, right? They tend to evolve. So the best advice for a D&D campaign is write something that can expand in many directions and then just kind of run with whichever one your players are most interested in. So you can really start the campaign. The classic is like, here's your little town and there's a nearby abandoned castle or whatever, and just like throw some seeds out there and see what happens. That's kind of my favorite way of doing it.
Yeah.
Because it gives a lot of player agency. And so the players will feel a lot of ownership of the campaign and feel very invested in it. It's obviously a little different if you're like if you mean like, how do I write one for publication? That's a lot harder. I've never actually done that.
Yeah. It's in learning how to GM, I was like, there's always that tendency you over prepare.
Yeah.
And it's like, really what you just need is just to know what's happening next. And you don't have to have it all figured out. The players are going to bring so much to the table,
The other sort of dirty little secret of DMing is that you get to control like where stuff happens. So like if your plan is for the players to turn left and go to town X, and then there's like an encounter there, and instead they refuse to do that and turn right and go to town Y, well, the encounter can just happen in town Y.
Yeah.
Like you don't have to you're not creating a real world, right. You're directing a stage play. Mm-hmm. And so like the things can be where you need them to be.
Right. And they don't know all the things you had planned. That's why you have a DM screen. So you're just like, you changed it and I don't like what you did. That's good stuff. So this one's kind of a cool one. So how do you stay inspired in your book ideas? So I'm thinking maybe this is along the lines of like, you're in the middle of writing it. How do you stick with it, like to see your way through maybe the difficult parts and see it through to its end?
I mean, that's the hardest part of the job. Some days you really don't want to do it and you have to get up and do it anyway. And, I'm not going to pretend I succeed every single day, but like enough of the time. So there's a certain amount of discipline that's part of it. I do tend to control like what I'm reading. I'll often try to read things that are not even necessarily in the same genre, but that have kind of the same vibe, right? If I'm trying to write something like Davi that's like funny and light, I'll read something like that and not something like really grim or really dry. Especially if I'm listening to it in audio, because I find that affects my mood a lot. So like a lot of Davi I wrote while listening to the Dungeon Crawler Carl audiobooks, which are
so fun.
fantastic. That's like the best audiobook I've ever heard.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm a big audiobook reader. I do a lot of audiobooks because it's how I have time to read books now. But yeah, those audio that helps. Music helps. Sometimes I'll have like not a playlist for the book in the sense that like you could listen to it and think, oh yeah, this is that part of the book, but just like a playlist of things that I know get me into the right mood. And they'll just put that on before I start writing. That helps. Rereading stuff that I know is in a thing helps. So yeah, there are things that I do to sort of get my brain into the right place.
Yeah. There's a book I read a while ago called Mind Management, Not Time Management. And a lot of it was like the secret to getting creative work done is like getting your head in the right space so that you can actually do the thing.
Yeah.
And that might mean changing your environment or, going somewhere or whatever. And lots of tricks to that.
I've also just like learned that like things that feel super intimidating and that you don't want to do them before you sit down at the keyboard often are easier once you actually sit down.
Yeah.
Sometimes just sitting down with the computer is the hardest part.
Yeah.
And so the power of routine is very important. I have a routine where I sit down with the computer every day at the same time. And so if, even if I feel bad, I'll sit down. And then once I've sat down, often it's not as bad as I thought it was.
Yeah.
I also have a cat who yells at me to sit down because
Yells at you to sit down?
Yeah, well, because he knows that once I sit down, he'll sit on the cushion next to me and get scritched a lot.
Okay.
Because I'll be procrastinating and I'll just like pay attention.
That seems like the best motivation.
Yeah.
That's
An interviewer asked me once, like, do all fantasy writers have cats? And I said something like, yes, if you don't have one, your publisher will issue you one.
Our cat has started sitting near me and it's my favorite. Her name is Ripley. We had to go with the alien stuff.
We have two cats, but one of them is my wife's cat and only reluctantly tolerates my presence.
Yeah. They pick a person, man. They pick a person. So I guess this is a general question. Like, how do you feel about game adaptations of books or vice versa? Like,
I love them when they're good. They can be good. Sometimes they work less well. Game adaptations are often better, oddly, because I think a lot of, depending on the game, it kind of lends itself well. Book adaptations of games are often quite bad, unfortunately, because it can be very hard. Like, if you translate a book into a game, then it's just kind of a linear game, and there are plenty of linear games, and that's fine. If you try to translate a game that is not particularly linear into a book, it often doesn't work particularly well. Especially because like stuff that is very interesting in a game because it's like intense and engaging, like shooting a bunch of guys, is often extremely boring in book form. And so that kind of raises problems because the vast majority of what you do over the course of a game is just like, I killed 4 orcs, then I killed 4 more orcs. And you're just like, this is dull. And so that's often a lot harder. And especially if the game is somewhat nonlinear, like, you can't, various people have tried to make like Dark Souls, the book, or like Elden Ring, the book. And like, it never works because there's something about that kind of like free roaming experience that's very hard to replicate in a game form.
I've heard the Elden Ring manga is hilarious.
Is it?
It's been one I've seen a bunch of people pop up.
Hilarious is not a word I associate
That's not
with
what I
Elden
would have
Ring,
thought
to be
either.
honest.
I would not, but yeah, apparently it's very funny.
There you go. I could see a parody being really good. Elden Ring is very ridiculous at times.
And, so I have to check that out. Actually, I've been eyeing Elden Ring. I keep waiting for it to. I'm like, I gotta buy this game.
I finally went and played it. There's a video online that convinced me to go and play it because like I've never been good enough to really enjoy Dark Souls.
Yeah.
Like I always just find it much too frustrating.
That's what scares me, honestly.
Yeah. Well, the thing in Elden Ring is because like it's more of an RPG, if you get stuck, you don't have to just like keep trying until you get good enough. You can just go and gain 10 levels and then come back. And like I'm like, okay, I can just out level my threats and then
that works. Yeah, it's one that once I finish Baldur's Gate 3, I think that's going to be
Baldur's Gate 3 is the best.
And this might end up being our last question, but I thought this was a cool one. So we've talked a lot about outlinings. And so this question was, what program or format do you use with your outlines? Or do you just kind of bullet point style, process, map, timeline? Like, what's that general process? You're like, I'm outlining, I'm doing all these things.
I generally just bullet point it. My sort of initial outlines are usually just bullet points at a level of like 1 line per chapter, maybe. And then what I think of as the final outline, the sort of scene by scene outline that I'll use while I'm writing, is about 1 paragraph per scene. That's just a Word doc with paragraphs in it. So it's mostly, I don't use anything besides Word and Notepad, really.
Okay.
I have a sort of intrinsic suspicion of process that gets too complicated. Like there are some tools, Scrivener is very popular and you can set up elaborate things, but I just, my tendency to dick around is very strong. And so I just have this, any process that gets too complicated, it's very easy to spend too much time on the process and not enough on the actual work. Yeah. So I try to just like keep things fairly straightforward.
Yeah.
And, we're stuck with Word because the whole publishing industry uses Word. And so I just use that, have to use it anyway for writing the actual book.
Mm-hmm. I've moved to Scrivener and I write my comics in screenplay format. Mm-hmm. So it's like a whole weird thing when I'm turning in book drafts and stuff. It's so different. I have to turn in PDFs. Okay. Well, I guess last question, I'll leave.
Actually, I might have
You got to jump in? All right, fair enough.
The last one was the last one.
Okay, that works.
I always feel terrible, but we want to keep on time to make sure everyone gets a chance for the book signing. So thank you all to the ones who put in your questions. We're sorry we couldn't get to them all, but they were really great questions, the ones that got asked. I do want to thank you for coming to our Lit Chat interview, and a big thank you to both Django and Michael for such a wonderful interview. We can clap. I'll signal you. Yeah. My little applause sign over my head, imagine it.